Early on in my career path, I was introduced to a man named Jeff Morgan. Little did I know that Jeff would end up becoming one of the most pivotal human beings in my life and a mentor and dear friend. Today on this show, we're going to talk about the importance of what a mentor can help with in your personal journey, how to be a leader and what responsible leadership might look like, whether it's in your personal life or your professional life, and also how to be mentored. Right? There's a big shift in our ego when we start to mentor and be mentored by somebody. There's a potential uptick in our ego when we find leadership. And it's really important for us to find ways to be responsible leaders and not shadow leaders. So today I'm going to talk to my very first mentor in my life, Jeff Morgan, about how to be a proper mentor, how to be a balanced leader, and how to take care of the people that we are mentoring. Jeff is one of the most important people in my life, and I am honored to share this space with him. And it's very interesting as we move from him being my mentor and him mentoring me into what he refers to as a mutual mentorship relationship. Hope you enjoy the conversation. We'll see you on the other side. But first, a message from our sponsor. Our healing journey can be difficult and might feel lonely at times. That's why I love sound baths. When we can get together in a community, we intrinsically support and feel supported by others. And that combined energy can help us go deeper into our own healing journeys. And all you have to do is just lay there for 1 hour and listen to beautiful healing sounds. I'm a sound healing practitioner, and I hold sound baths on a regular basis in the greater Seattle area. You can find my next sound baths on my website at adamrealhealing.com. That's Adam, A-D-A-M, Real, R-I-E-H-L, Healing, Healing.com. AdamRealHealing.com. Your healing is worth your time. And now an uninterrupted podcast with Jeff Morgan. Right, welcome back to my show. Today I'm talking with a dear, dear friend of mine, Jeff Morgan. So Jeff has been so Jeff and I started out as coworkers. He was a boss. I was a bartender at the time at a restaurant nightclub down in Seattle. And for some reason, Jeff saw something in this dirty ass hippie. And actually, I think you used that phrase. I don't know why I see something in this dirty ass hippie, but I do. So would you like me to mentor you, or would you like me to guide you? Would you like to step into a leadership role? There was basically these phrases wrapped up in these conversations that we had. And at the time I was, just had a baby. I was really kind of not figuring life out at all. I think I was 23 at the time, 24, somewhere in there. And needed some direction. And there comes this guy and in restaurants, I got to say, in restaurants, like, you don't really find, at least back then, this was 2004. We didn't find mentors. We didn't have people that wanted to develop. We didn't have people, in my experience, I didn't have people that wanted to coach me. It was just like, hey, you're a human. You serve that table. When you're done, get out of here. And that's it. You're a number. You create numbers, and then you get off my clock. You're the first person that ever said, like, hey, I see something in you that you might not see. Would you like to work together and figure this out together? So Jeff, you're the first, I would say the first official non-parental mentor that I've had. And the beauty of that is that not only have we had this mentor-mentee relationship, but over the 20 years we've now known each other, it's become more of a friendship, and this mutual friendship. Instead of like me always going to you for advice and guidance, now we have like just mutual conversations about life, about business, about whatever we're working through. So Jeff has a litany of things that he's done in his life that we could probably spend this entire podcast talking about. But right now, I just want to talk to my dear friend and mentor, Jeff Morgan. So thanks for being here, brother.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. It's I'm excited to be here, mostly just to hang out with you. And if we have to record it just so that I get to spend time with you, so be it.
There you go. So Jeff and I, we try to meet once a month, which usually ends up once every 2 to 3 months. But we do our due diligence. But we talk coffee, we talk shop, we talk life, we talk about all these different things. And the basis of our relationship started with work and something around work and saying, hey, like I run this restaurant, you're part of my staff, you seem like you know what you're doing, or you can be developed into something different, so let's do that. So we started that relationship, and then I don't say quickly became friends, but over the time we became friends. And again, like I can't emphasize enough, like especially in the early 2000s. I mean, you have a different background. You came from like Red Robin, I think,
Yeah.
and where there was more of like a culture of development, I guess. Whereas the first jobs in restaurants I had was at the Olive Garden, so Darden Corporation, and you were a number at best. Like they didn't know our names, they didn't care about us, they didn't know if we had kids or jobs or schooling, anything like that. It was just, you were literally a number. You ran the food, and then you got off the fucking clock and you left. And then I transitioned to Jillian's, where we met, and that was probably one of the last places I would ever expect to find somebody that would want to mentor me. Jillian's was a like 30,000 square foot nightclub that had pool tables and video games and like all this shit going on, fights all the time. Like it was just like a drunken, crazy kind of experience until you started there and kind of reeled it back in for everybody and made it a place that we respected and made it a place that we loved to be. Not just a place where we're like, hey, I'm going to go get drunk for 4 hours and make some money. Like this will be great. So having that mentality in a place that is usually full of debauchery, was like a unicorn experience, and to have that be one of the most pivotal jobs that I ever had, because I met somebody like yourself, it changed the way that I approached work. And so one of the things I want to talk about today that we're going to talk about is the mentor-mentee kind of relationship, how to develop that, how to seek a mentor if you're looking to be mentored, how to accept to be a mentor. A lot of times people don't come up to you and be like, hey, I'm going to mentor you, right? Sometimes you kind of find yourself in these mentor-mentee relationships. And then what we're going to talk about also is just leadership in general in this day and age. What that looks like, whether it's you're a leader in your household, a leader in your friend group, a leader in your work. And leader is a very self-defined term. I've worked with leaders that have seemingly very menial jobs, like a dishwasher, right? I've worked with dishwashers that command more respect than the CEO of that company, and it's because of the way they present themselves, the way they talk to people, the way they respect people, the way they love people, right? It's not just you're a number, go do what I say or you're fired, So lots to talk about today. Really excited to dive into this with you, my friend. So I guess I want to start with you and just, because you've been doing this type of work for a long time. Business consultant, developing restaurants, developing people, developing businesses. And do you remember like the first time you were coached or mentored or had that kind of like gift given to you?
Yeah, so I was fortunate because I grew up in what I would call a coaching environment. I grew up swimming, which is if you look at me now, it's like, oh, okay. So my first coach, the Bob Knudsen, he was amazing. Just great at coaching and encouraging, and he showed up every day. He literally had a bounce in his step, and he was excited about the progress that people made. And so throughout my life, I've always run into people that were willing to give a damn about me, and when you are fortunate enough to be in that environment, I think you kind of understand that it's your responsibility to share and give back at some point in your journey, and and as you get older and older, I think it's more about trying to give back. Because of how fortunate you've been or how fortunate I've been.
Yeah.
So.
That's a powerful statement, because I mean that definitely rings true for me in my journey. I never thought about being a leader. I never thought about trying to give back. I never thought about stepping out into I never thought about what my next step would be, let alone moving into a management position and pursuing that for 20 years. But when I met you and when we had we would have one-on-ones on a weekly basis. You knew about my family, you knew about my kids, and like, granted, my fiance at the time worked with us, so I mean, you kind of had to know about us all. But you saw my kid all the time, you saw
Yeah.
Sid, but still, like and I saw that with the other staff too. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to care about what Adam thinks. It's like, no, bartender, hey Tom, hey Sergio, hey Eric, hey, all these people, like, you knew about them. They weren't just numbers. They weren't just figures, and that made such an impact on me that I innately, without even really realizing it, made that direct path for myself too, and said, you know what, I'm going to find people to develop as well. I'm going to develop a team. I'm going to move towards this because I was given such a gift at a young age in some direction. And that's basically when I look at the restaurant industry at that time, you had a lot of people that were just trying to pay their bills. They wanted some freedom in their schedule, but they didn't really have, and I don't mean direction as far as like, oh, I don't know what to do with my life, but like school direction or career direction. Like, it was just, we like to work these hours. We like to walk home with money in our pockets. And then outside of that, we'll figure it out later.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So having somebody put some structure into your life at a young age like that was very beautiful, man. So with your personal development, when did you move from into like a management role into restaurants?
So sometime in college, I think, is when I understood. College is a really interesting place because the best things that you learn are pretty much always outside class, right? I had I went to school. I was swimming, and that's really why I went. And it was like, okay, well, let's figure out a degree too. I had 7 different majors, right?
Wow.
I think I first started studying Russian because I was really sure that I was going to be a spy and that was going to be important.
No shit. Dude, I've known you for 20 years and I had no idea.
So, so you do that, and then it's like, man, Russian's really hard. So I guess the spy business is out.
Yeah, the spying's the easy part. The learning the Russian's the hard shit, right?
Right. So, but I had a fascination with English, and so did that. But I ended up, my first 4 years were down at U of O, and I was going to be a psychologist, and because that's fascinating, right? So, just understanding people and understanding that, psychology and stuff like that was fascinating. But I was in my 4th year, I was going through my practicums, and I realized that if I graduate and do this, the people that I'm going to work with all the time have issues, right? And I, as a 21-year-old kid, I realized, hey, I don't know that I have a strong enough heart to help those people right now. And but as I was going, the thing that I loved was understanding about coaching and teaching. Yeah. So I got to that place where it's like, oh, I'd really like to be a coach and a teacher. Because I grew up swimming, I was like, well, I'll just be a swim coach and then, figure out how to be a teacher. But at that same time, I was working at the fairgrounds, and one of my mentors, Fred Ekstrom, just an amazing guy. He was my boss, and just created a great environment for me and a guy named Steve Cooper, and just introduced us to all facets of the hospitality industry. We did, county fairs where we worked for 10 days straight. We did huge 3,000 person banquets. We did, we sold concessions at the horse arena. And so it was just this wonderful experience. And while I was doing that, my brother was at Washington State's hotel, hospitality program, their extension that used to be in Seattle U.
Okay.
So he's like, hey, I'm really loving this. Why don't you check it out? And so I transferred there, graduated, with a hospitality degree. And lo and behold, the work that I did, kind of understanding psychology and stuff like that, it's like, I think that's really helped, because it was like it helped inform my thoughts around, part of life's journey is to figure out, why you're here,
Right.
right? So, and for me, the at that place, it's like, okay, so I've been given this, gift of people have mentored me and looked out for me and taken care of me in the right ways,
Right.
through my life. And wouldn't it be great if I could help others that way?
Mm.
And, when you start touching that, you realize that even though you're trying to give yourself, man, you get so much back in
Right.
return that, it's almost selfish, right? Because you get so much back from trying to be of service to others.
Right.
So, that kind of rambling answer, but I think that was kind of my metamorphosis or whatever of like, hey, what am I going to do? So I got to that place. It's like, okay, coach, teacher. I love the restaurant business because of the people that are in it, as well as the food, beverage, alcohols.
Yeah, right.
And one of the things that I tell people all the time, it's like, hey, I never wanted a real job. I never wanted to be in office. That didn't hold any interest to me. And this just really seemed like a way where all those things, got touched, right? So hanging out with people, eating great food, being of service to guests, right?
Yeah.
Helping others on the team. So
Yeah. Wow. And it's funny because like in there used to be this very scarcity mindset in business, in all business, like knowledge, proprietary knowledge, right? This is my knowledge.
Yeah.
We choose very closely who we're going to share that with, and mainly because like they're going to benefit us in some way, right? And so what you're talking about is that it's that abundance mentality, right? If I
Absolutely.
have it all and I can give it all away, then that just means more is going to come in, right? But if I sit here and it's like the handful of sand metaphor, right? If you openly hold a handful of sand in your palm, just kind of hold it there, it more or less stays there. You might lose a grain or two, but if you grip that sand with all your might, it's going to start falling through your fingers. All the sand's going to fall away, and you'll be left with maybe just dust in your hand. Right. So in that same mentality in business, if we see the abundance of business, if we welcome the neighboring restaurant to come in because we know that more restaurants will just innately bring more people around us and not say, no, fucking restaurant, this is my block, you can't be here. And then nobody's going to come out to you because you're a destination spot. Right. Whereas you have other restaurants around you. Now you're your destination. Now you have walk by traffic. Right.
Yeah.
So you loosely hold that sand, that handful of sand, and you'd be amazed at how much you actually keep and how much that can build, So, and in that time frame, it was very much that, this is my mentality. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on is that it's funny, the restaurant and the hospitality industry gets a lot of credit, I would maybe say, for employing actors and musicians and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But conversely, I think there's more therapists and psychiatrists that have either worked in that field and got into restaurants, or got into restaurants and realized like, hey, I'm a good fucking therapist, because that's all we really do. If you really break it down to it, a good bartender is a fucking damn good therapist. Hold the space, give you constant kind of feedback in some kind of way. Open ear.
All right. Well, so let's unpack a couple of things.
Yeah.
Therapist, right? So I would never claim to be a therapist, good, bad, indifferent. I think I'm a good listener.
You
right?
are, most definitely.
And sometimes, or most times, I think that's all people need, right? There are actually, there are just a few people, yourself included, that have the patience to listen to me while I think out loud, because sometimes it's just very tortured.
That's a learned skill. I have to say that was a learned skill.
Right? Right?
Most
It's like,
definitely.
oh, come on. When
Like, do
does
I have
this-
to remember where he was at, or is he going to remember where he was at? Because damn, that's a long pause.
But but listening to folks, sometimes that's all folks need.
Right.
That along their journey. And you're kind of talking about abundance, right? So, and the flip side of that is scarcity, right? So abundance theory, scarcity theory, and those things, right? So if you look at those things, right, the corollary there is love and fear, right? So first, hate is not the opposite of fear, or hate is not the opposite of love.
Right.
Fear is, right?
Right.
So so abundance, love, right? So I know that there will be plenty going around, and one of my mentors, Mark, has always believed in that, and I gives and gives and gives, and always has lived an abundant and generous life.
Right.
So just another great role model, right? The so and that the scarcity, it's like, hey, if like you're saying, if you hold on to things so tightly and you're so fearful, it's hard to be open and share with others, right? So it's a choice, right? So that I think at one point you and I talked about the story of two wolves. Do you remember that? Right. So little boy talking to his grandfather, and his grandfather says, "Hey, inside you and in each one of us, there's two wolves. One is fear and hate and misery, pain, suspicion, all those things, and then the other one is love, joy, acceptance. The and they're at war with each other. And the little boy looks at his grandfather and goes, "Hey, which one wins?" And his grandfather's response was,
Whichever one you feed.
"The one you feed,"
Yep.
right? So, and so that there are times, I think, with me and probably everybody, that you kind of lean towards that fear,
Yeah.
right? So in those times, right, there has to be that conscious decision where it's like, okay, which wolf do I want to feed, right? So, and the more you feed it, the stronger it gets, right? So that discipline has always served me. It's like, hey, belief in abundance, belief in love. I go to Hawaii all the time, so that feeling of aloha, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's important.
It is. And I think, you made a good point. We're constantly giving ourselves opportunities, or life gives us opportunities to make that choice. And the more times we make the choice towards that abundance, that muscle gets stronger. But the more choice we make towards that scarcity, then that muscle gets stronger, kind of like the wolf you're talking about,
Yeah.
right? So we're constantly given these opportunities to look at our life and say, hey, I've got a lot of this going on. Can I give it away, or am I going to hold on to it? And then you have the choices that, and the actions that follow that choice, right?
Yeah.
And if you're constantly living in that life of like, what the fuck is going on? Why am I not? I think I'm doing all the right things, and I
Right.
think I'm moving on the right directions, but I still keep missing something. That's a mentality to look at. Are you holding on to everything? This is mine. This is my information. This is my thing. This is my material thing. This is my proprietary whatever. Or are you finding a way to share that?
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing, because in this, in the era that we live in, or that we're coming out of, the business side, it was very proprietary. This is my information, and so we're starting to hopefully make that swing in the pendulum to where things are getting a little more open. But it's going to take some time to change that mentality too, and to get that story to a point to where we open source information, and so say what you want about Elon Musk, right? I don't want to get into his politicals. I don't want to get into Twitter. But there's some things that he's done in the past, and he still does, that I appreciate. And one of the things is open source information. And that was one of the things he got into Twitter with, the idea behind his open source information. But again, I'm not going to get into that shit. But the first thing that came up that for him doing this that really kind of opened my eyes to the idea for somebody on that scale to do this was he put a bunch of R&D into developing a frictionless, let's call it like a bullet train that goes from a point in California to another point in California that would generally be about 4 or 5 hours away. And he was designing this bullet train to go in like 45 minutes. Right?
Yep.
And so there was a tube, there's air, there's magnets, there's all this shit, right? And so it's like state of the art, all this stuff, new technologies figuring out. Well, then he figured out like, well, I don't want to do that. I want to go to space and I want to do all this other shit. So he scrapped all the R&D for that, but he open sourced it on the internet and said, hey, everybody out there, this is what I've done. This is as far as I've gotten. I don't really have the time or the will to want to do this anymore, but here's all the information I've gotten so far.
Yeah.
Anybody want to pick it up and run with it? Fucking have at it. There's no charge. There's no information. There's nothing but information out here. And that to me was like, holy shit, man, that's amazing. Like, good for you for doing that. You know, how many times people have, like, software developers have developed like a silicone microchip, and then all of a sudden it's like that's all theirs and nobody else can have that information. Well, how many different people worked on that thing? How many people like put their information and ideas into that, and now just one company owns the patent to that and everybody's got to bow down to them? Like, this is where knowledge should not be proprietary, in my opinion, right? So, you know, having somebody like that on that scale open up source for that information shows me like, why can't I show my neighbor my P&L statement? You know, why can't I like share information about like what our budgets are? You know, we're probably working towards a similar goals, you know, so why can't we open this up a little bit more and share that? And same with the information about mentoring, right? That's how we start to create a bigger and stronger team, if that's the team, if we're building a work team, or a stronger work or family environment if we're building a family. Open source your information, open source your emotions, open source your feelings, your ideas, right? Let that be all out there so that we can let the ego go and then meet everybody where they're at.
Yeah. Really well said. But I think, again, just to go back to my experience, you know, because I grew up in the restaurant business, right? So know a lot of people in it. And Adam, there are so many people that live that way, right? So, you talk a little bit about kind of competition and you think about it, sports is always probably the best example where it's like, you have those people that you get on the field and you want to compete and you want to do your best, right? But you get off the field, right? And, at the end of the game, and regardless of who won or lost, the coaches come because they've had shared experiences. They might have even been on the same team,
right?
So, somewhere, or been a part of the same coaching tree, right? You can just see them hug each other and you can see kind of true connection there, right? It's like, so, and that's kind of how it was for me in the restaurant biz. That, I got to hang out with a bunch of different leaders and talk to them, and still get to this day where, it's like, yes, we want to do the best that we can, right? Mm-hmm. But we want to do it because, of our execution and the work that we do, not because there's any secret. In the restaurant business, there really are no secrets.
No,
right?
We're all doing the similar thing.
Yeah, right. So the only difference, it's not necessarily the understanding; it's the execution.
Yeah.
Right. So I have a dear friend that, and in our lives, truly competitors, right? But she has been gracious in her time, mentoring, talking with me. We talk about the different things that we're thinking about and doing. Mm-hmm. Now, knowing that a lot of times we're like in the same market or even the same parking lot, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
There's a genuine interest in each other's well-being, and she takes the approach the same way as far as team, right? So, loves her team, wants them to grow. And I think, one of the things that's a true sign of, putting people first is when there is an opportunity that's presented that's so amazing outside the organization, and somebody leaves to go do that, and it's the next part of their journey, and gets them closer to their dream. That's a celebration, right?
Yeah.
So it's like what so happy for
Right.
that person, and them moving on.
Yeah.
So
And that was actually pretty surprising to me because that happened with myself.
Yeah.
So when I left Jillian's, where we met, you had already left. You were on your path, but I was still working with another what I would consider mentor, Tony Humphreys.
Yeah.
So he was our regional operations manager, right? Great, the Meadow Shark. He's a fucking great human being.
Right.
Very very statuesque. And so after you left, Tony kind of like stepped in and was still helping me out and mentoring me, and I had some other managers with me, but I remember I had an opportunity to leave, and somebody sought me out and was like, "Hey, we have this opportunity to open up a restaurant in Redmond. We'd really love your skill set." And it was at that time it was a lateral move. It was AGM to AGM, and I remember I've talked to you about it, but I was kind of hesitant to talk to Tony. But when I did finally talk to him, he gave me like the advice I never thought I'd get from him, and he basically said, "Hey, look." This. At that point, I'd worked at Jillian's for 8 years, right? I'd pretty much done everything there, from busing to washing dishes, bouncing, bartending, all that shit, managing. So I knew that place inside and out.
Yeah.
And so Tony said, you can be here and be a great manager. You've proven that. But if you want to develop your career and you want to continue to grow, you've got to leave. You've got to go find somewhere else, because every restaurant's going to be different. Every team's going to be different. Every company's going to be different. So for you to be well-rounded, you need to get out of here and do something different.
Yeah.
And for somebody to tell a tenured employee to get out of here and go do something different, that wasn't fucking up. I was still meeting my budgets. I was doing all the things I needed to do. I was still a good employee on paper. And he was like, no, you need to leave. Like, that was profound to me, to be like, wow. If somebody that is, he had 5-6 restaurants under him, staffing probably sucked. We don't want to hire new managers and push people out, but he saw the development of me as a human being, not me as the figure of, this number on this P&L in this store. And that, again, that was a huge, profound moment for me, of that release of, I just care about you as the human. I don't, definitely, yes. While you're working for me, yes, I want to make sure you make the numbers and do all the things you can, but also, you're a human being, and I have feelings, and I care about you and your family, and that I want the best for you. So if this is the best move, get out there and make me fucking proud. Like, all right, Tony, that's awesome. Thanks, man.
Yeah.
And that, again, those things really kind of get us ready to be coached in that kind of way, because it, in a way, for me, I'll say it broke down my ego. It took my ego away, and because at that time, I'm like, well, I was making the money, I was doing the numbers, I had to provide for my family, I had all these things that the egoic Adam needed to do. And then when you have somebody that is what I would consider a higher stature than me, whether it's business-wise or age-wise or knowledge base, kind of like meet me at this very compassionate level that I wasn't normally used to being met at, it took my ego and said, like, no, hey, guess what, guy? Go sit over there in the corner for a little while. We don't need you. Like, this is just going to be a human-to-human conversation. And that's a big step, because a lot of us, our egos are very flared, whether we realize it or not, until we become conscious of that. And I think, so we're going to keep talking about mentoring, but I think that's one of the biggest steps in a human's journey, is being able to understand that you can set your ego aside and let somebody teach you and guide you. Right. And I think that's one of those big things in the beginning, is like, for myself, I had an ego that didn't think it needed to be taught. Didn't think that I don't care about this restaurant shit. I'm just here to make money. I'm here to get drunk, and I'm hopefully not get caught off by my bartender while I'm working, And then all of a sudden it turns into a career, because I was able to see a path in front of me, and I was able to put that egoic, driver aside for a little bit.
Yeah.
So for yourself, like, how do you so when we look and we start to see people that we were like, oh, maybe that person wants to be developed, or maybe that
Yeah.
person has some things, like how do you approach that in a way that doesn't scare people off, or maybe lets them kind of make that mutual decision as well?
Yeah. Well, so I think it's that, right? So so if you look at people as people with, their own unique wants, needs, desires, all that stuff, those people that want to grow and try management or leadership or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
it's like we'll help them along that path, right? Those people that just want to be bartenders because their journey eventually is going to take them someplace else, like Devin or Sergio,
Uh-huh.
right? And,
Mm-hmm.
it's like okay. But we're a great means to an end because we serve their needs as financially and
Mm-hmm.
time wise, schedule wise, all that stuff while they're getting ready to go do their real job. Right?
Right.
It's like so serve those people too.
Yeah.
Right? So I the I don't know that I've ever you know the Adam, you give me a ton of credit for kind of selecting you, but that wasn't me, that was you, right?
Mm.
So I think I just tried to create a space or an environment where, because you were interested in learning and you saw what we were doing, you were like, hey, that might be interesting to me,
Mm.
and try and create that environment, right?
Yeah.
So it's the in this day and age, meeting people where they're at, probably a little overused, but
Yeah.
however you choose to say it, it's like if you show up every day and you're going to treat people as people, then I you know helping them along the way, right? So it kind of goes back to that. My discovery kind of through college is like, hey, that's what I wanted to do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The and like I said, sometimes I feel really selfish because it's like helping people along the way just kind of fills my bucket.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And that's I feel that as well. When I first started developing people, like you get this like sense of joy or this fulfillment of in your own body of like, oh my gosh, like seeing the development and seeing the progress that somebody else is doing is filling me up. I'm like, well, that's fucking cool, man. Like, all right,
right,
I'll take
right,
that. Like proxy kind of like, but you make a good point. Some people, and I want to say just and use it as a word is like, well, that's all they want to do. But some people, that's their job is only their job, right? For me, my
yeah,
job was something to fulfill some kind of like goal in life or some kind of learning experience. And that was something that I was gifted by yourself and other managers and other people that I worked with. But some people are completely fine with just going in, punching the clock, doing that job, and then leaving and going the fuck home and not having to think about that job anymore.
yeah,
Right? So they don't want to be developed in that job. They don't want to grow. They don't want to become more responsible in that job. And the first couple times that happened to me when I saw somebody was like, hey, cool, I'm going to develop that person, egoically. Hey, you look like you got some stuff. I'm going to teach you. And then like, I don't want to fucking do that. I don't want to put in more hours. I don't want more
yeah,
responsibilities. All I want to do is come in, clock in, take care of my tables and go to that home. Be with my family. And that was surprising to me. And it really helped me in my later years understand that I don't have to I don't have to appreciate my job and work to find self-worth, right? It can just be something that pays my bills, and then my life itself is my self-worth,
right.
right? But I was
Oh,
working.
so you are not your job.
Yeah, right. Well, okay. So you actually made this very clear to me one time, right? When I was still young, I think I just had Peyton, my oldest daughter. She was maybe under one at the time.
Yeah, how old is she now?
She's fucking 18, man. She's in college now. Yeah, perspective, bro. And I can't remember what I was lamenting about, but I was lamenting about something and working too much. Maybe my ex-fiance at the time and I were having some issues. And, you know, again, like as a mentor, you weren't just like work stuff. I could talk to you about personal stuff, right? And I remember you told me one time, you said, okay, so let's just fast forward to the day you die. We're at your funeral, right? Okay, we're at your funeral. Everybody's up there crying about Adam, telling stories and all this shit. And you said, do you think that somebody's going to stand up there and be like, man, that guy Adam, whew, he could run a fucking shift. Man, that guy could write a schedule and phase people like nobody's business. He always kept his numbers. And I'm like, no, hopefully they don't talk about that shit at my funeral. They're like, yeah, this is Adam. Maybe he was an asshole, but at least he was an asshole in his home life, not just in work, right? You know, talk about me as a human being, not about the numbers I generated. And that made a big impact on me as far as like, well, shit, I'm not my job. I'm everything outside of my job.
Yeah.
My job can fuel me, or my job can be just a job. Either way is fine, as whatever I define it as, and just be okay with that. And that changed a lot of perspective for me and gave me that freedom to see people for what they wanted to be met as and not for what I wanted to push them towards. And I think that's another thing to kind of be not weary of, but so if you are what you would consider a mentor or the ability to mentor somebody, if you're constantly seeking people out to mentor and to teach, you know, a lot of times we seek the mentor ourselves, whether it's purposefully or it's something accidental. Sometimes we accidentally find ourselves in a mentor type role of like, oh shit, I guess we've been meeting now for a month and you're taking, okay, I guess we're mentor mentee. Okay. You know, but a lot of times we have that person sometimes that reaches out and says, I'm going to teach you, I'm going to mentor you. And that can kind of go sideways sometimes, you know, because there's ego involved in that. Like, I'm going to be the one to teach you. I'm going to be the one to show you this. And I'm going to be the one to develop your skills. Well, are those the skills you want developed? Yeah. Do you want that person developing your skills? Or do you trust that person enough to take over that part of your life? Right?
Yeah. And so I think, a mentor choosing, hey, I'm going to work with this person, you know, whether they like it or not. That just sounds insane, right? It's like, why do that, right? It's like it's going to be frustrating for the both of you, right? One of the things that I often tell people is like, hey, I'm here if you want to talk, right? One of the kind of, for me, kind of a sad, frustrating thing, and is probably an indication of the level of my skill in mentoring people, is that not very many people take me up on that, right?
Right, yeah.
And I've tried in different ways, you know, as far as reaching out, you know, it's like, hey, you know, would you? But after a couple of times, you understand that they, at that time, probably don't have space for you in their lives, right? And you know, even though you see that talent, right, and you're like, oh, this person, you know, could be a great, you know, coach and leader and do that, they're not ready to do that, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, and why? So create that environment, right? So create that environment where those things are possible, right?
Yeah.
But don't demand it. It's like, you know, so, you're talking about Peyton and going off to college and stuff like that. That, in kind of in that secret place in your mind, you probably have a couple of things that you'd love her to be.
Right.
You know, as far as profession. And then there's a couple of things where it's like, man, I damn sure hope she doesn't choose this path. Right.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But, man, that's not up to you. Right. So all you can do is look back and say, hey, did I create that environment where, you know, she can grow up to be the strong, healthy, independent woman that has just joy and love and throughout her journey, right?
Yeah.
And as a pop, what could be better than that?
Right, definitely. So, you know, I talked to Monica about that a lot. For those that don't know, Monica is not the biological mother of our children, right? But she's there with them. She's, supportive. She's a great mother figure. But I talked to her a lot about we can create the environment of happiness, but we can't force happiness to be had, right? And that's kind of like what you're saying. We can create that environment for development, for learning, right? But we're not going to force it down somebody's throat. A great example for myself with that. There's this woman named Kim that I used to work with at a brewery about maybe 10 years ago. Yeah, when we worked together, she was a bartender, server. She was great at her job. She was fantastic. Guests loved her. I loved her. She was always on time, did all the things. But she was very much a clock in, clock out. I go work and I go home and I do my thing, right? Had no desire to be developed. I mean, which was great. Which is fine, right? She reached out to me, and I haven't talked to her in years. We worked together for maybe 3 or 4 years, and then I haven't talked to her. I think I lost track of her, but I think she's in Vegas somewhere. And she reached out to me about 3 or 4 weeks ago to say that she's like, "Hey, I've decided to go into more of a leadership role, and I'm taking classes in how to become a leader and a guide and a coach and all this stuff. And one of the writing assignments we had was write about a manager that had the most impact in your life. And then the follow-up question was, have you ever told that person?" And she said, "Hey, I realized that was you, and I never told you how much of an impact you had on my life. And thank you for that. And this is what I'm doing now with my life. Is it okay if I, use you as a reference at some point in time if I get stuck on some things or need help developing?" I'm like, please, man, right. That's great. And that's the perfect example of that, like where at that point in time in her life, she was just happy just doing what she did, right? Just going and clocking in, making money and going home. But knowing like 10 years later that there was somebody that had an impact in her life, and then she still felt comfortable enough to reach out to that person and say, "Hey, like this is what you meant to me, and I know I didn't take you up on it then, but can we do that now?" Like, dude, that's right. Please, man, and that's beautiful. That's right time, right place. Your mentality is in where you want it to be, and there's still somebody that's there to help coach you in some kind of way. Like she could have found somebody else, no problem. But that was just it's really meaningful to me to have that, especially being out of that industry now for so long.
Right.
And I still have my times where I can coach and guide people and mentor in my own ways in the yoga industry and the energy work.
Yeah, you think?
It's a whole different ballgame now. There's less alcohol involved. But it's really nice, and it's comforting to see it's still working.
Yeah.
Like the formula still works.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
So so how does a mentee become understanding that they're ready to be coached? And if you're figuring out your mentality, like how do you find somebody that like create that trust, create that environment to where you're feeling supported, you're feeling that you're learning something, but you're also feeling like this like kind of a mutual thing between the both?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I just think about me as a mentee, right? Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing as a mentee is that, hey, let that person know, right? So, hey, let that person know that you think that they have something that you would like to understand or benefit from, and show up, right? So, and that's why it's sometimes it can be very delicate because it's like, as a mentee, it's like, so I'd love to learn, but that kind of that thought in your head sometimes is like, oh yeah, but why would they want to spend time,
right.
With me and stuff like that, but it's, so as a person that loves kind of coaching and developing and creating that environment, you have to be pretty sensitive to that, right? Yeah. Because and sometimes it's like you get distracted, or there's a harsh word or something like that, and it's like, okay, this person has no time for me, and and you miss that opportunity.
Yeah.
So it's a balance. I think for me, I think about those people that I see as mentors, right? And it's amazing. In my life, I've had mentors that have been life mentors for me. Probably the most obvious and natural one was my dad, right? So he was just an amazing man, right? So I told you earlier on, it's like I think I'm a good listener. My dad, amazing listener, right?
Okay.
And was just great at being able to listen and kind of feather a conversation, just add just enough commentary so that you felt good about talking about whatever you wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was he was great at just hanging out. And I remember days where we were driving in a car to swim meet or something like that, and we'd drive for like 45 minutes, complete silence, and then we'd both start talking about the same damn thing.
Yeah.
And, it's just like the but he, until his last days, and through that, he truly was a great mentor, and even talked about kind of his in life process, right? So just because he's like, well, I'll tell you what I'm seeing, so that hopefully in a long time from now,
Yeah.
there's something that you can use there too.
Yeah.
So
Wow. Wow.
yeah, so he was always there,
Yeah.
right? And man, did I give him some reasons for him not to be there. Throughout my life, and there were some things, and there are some times in my life where you look back, they were hilarious, but it wouldn't be something that you'd be proud to talk to your dad about. And I was talking to him about that kind of stuff, in the later years. And he's like, I never asked you about anything that I didn't want to know the answer to, right? And I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. And then I started telling him about that.
Well, I'm old enough now. You're not going to ground me. We'll be all good.
Right? And then, you start talking about that, and he goes, yeah, but when I was a kid, I did this, right? And it's like, okay. But as much of a badass I think I was, whatever, it's like, man, you had it, right? So he just had some great stories. So.
Oh man. Well, isn't that? I mean, in a way, and I might just be speaking from personal experience, but in a way, when we find a mentor especially in our adulter years, in a way, I mean, that's almost like it's the parenting being continued.
Absolutely.
And it's so I was introduced to a term recently in a book. Nicole LePera wrote a book called How to Do the Work, and she introduced me to a term called reparenting. It's not her term; it's just the first time I heard it, and it basically means loosely saying that as you get older, you realize there's just shit that you didn't learn by no fault of anybody's. Maybe everybody's doing the best they can. Maybe your childhood was a little different, but when we get to a point in our life, in our adult life, we realize, okay, we didn't learn budgeting, we didn't learn nutrition, we didn't, whatever it is, right? That's your opportunity to fill in those blanks, and so that term's called reparenting, right? So how do we reparent ourselves to go to bed on time, to make sure that we get enough sleep, right? Whatever, and in a way, like, that mentor relationship can help continue what the parenting or the reparenting kind of idea is in a more grander scale, right? So now we've gotten to a point of life, right? And now we have a professional life, or this extra, this 20s and 30s, our more adult life, who's going to help guide us through there. Now we have an opportunity for like a mentor to help guide us in a maybe professional way, but through that professional relationship, it bleeds into that like personal side. You just eventually learn about the person's personal life. And a good mentor, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say that, but all the mentorship that I've had, that I've received from people, know my life intimately.
Yeah.
Like they knew what I was doing, why I was doing it, how many kids I had, what those kids were doing, what my relationships were like. Like it wasn't just like, hey, business guy, this is what we're going to talk about, business, 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 and then I don't care about your personal life.
Yeah. Well, I want to take a step back.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about mentorings, and some mentors are for life, right?
Yep.
And then the other thing that you find out is like some mentors will only mentor you for a while, right?
Okay.
Or at least that's been my experience,
Yeah.
right? So I look back and I think about the mentors that I have now in my life, right? And it's like, well, these folks, including you, right? So you've now become a mentor, which is a fun
Interesting
little
shift.
journey, right? It's like, hey, those people are going to be mentors for life, right? But there are some where, for whatever reason, there's an expiration date on
Right.
that, right? So as a mentee, sometimes you have to go, it's sad, but it's kind of the same thing, right? So as you learn, as a mentee, sometimes it's like, okay, well, whatever I was going to learn, that's done, we're moving on.
Yeah.
And you can't get too wrapped up in that, right?
Yeah. I had an experience with that when I left Jillian's and started working at iPick. So that was my first, the first time I built a team. The first time I was the boss. I had a regional manager,
Yeah.
but no Tony Humphreys, and no shade to Alex, but he wasn't a developer. He was developing a company at that point in time, so he didn't really have time to develop me as a human. And I was the GM. I was theoretically the developer of the team now, right? And so I had the excitement of opening the restaurant and building the team. We hired staff, we hired managers, everybody was doing things. We all had goals we were working towards that were opening the site and all this stuff that was set down by corporate. But once we got the site opened up and we got into our day-to-days, I realized that I didn't have a mentor anymore. And that was the first time in my professional career, after having one for so many years, probably 8 years at that point in time, where I didn't have a mentor working with me. Right. I still had you as I could reach out to you. I still had Tony. I could reach out to Tony, but I didn't have anybody working directly with me that I could just call up and be like, hey, runner of this site, of this company, please help me with the company running. Right. And I didn't have that anymore. And so that was the first like kind of panic attack that I had of like, shit, I'm on my own. Like, fuck, man, who let this child ride the bus? Like, I'm just a kid, And so I reverted back to the initial books and the initial stuff that you had me go through when we started working together, like, Who Moved My Cheese, oh gosh, what are all the Ken Blanchard books? Ken Blanchard, basically.
Right.
And 1 Minute Manager, there you go, stuff
all
like
that
that.
Stuff.
And that gave me at least a footing to get back into of like, okay, calm down. We're refreshing our information. Okay, cool. Now, if you want to find a mentor, or now you can start to open yourself up to be the mentor to the staff that you've now hired that are very junior, very mixed in their experiences. And let's get this team cohesive, and let's take all the stuff that you were mentored in and develop that towards your team, right? So then it was like, okay, now not just reading 1 Minute Manager for me, now I'm going to get 10 copies of it and give it to all my team members. Hey, let's all read this so we can get on a similar page to being, talking the way we talk to our staff, the way we manage people. So I wasn't like mentoring individuals at that time. I was mentoring the team, which is, kind of my job.
Yeah.
But through that openness and then through the one-on-ones, which is, that formula that you taught us, you sit down with every single manager once a week, talk to them about their work, about their goals, about their personal life, learn about them, show them that they're human beings, right? Create the relationship. And then from that, then we started developing those like mentor relationships of like, oh, Adam, you know this, can you teach me that? And it was just like this natural progression of going from panic and sheer like amazement of like, I'm the boss now, shit, okay, I have no idea what I'm doing, to calming it down and going back to what basically you taught me in the beginning.
Yeah. Well, so it's funny, you probably owe that guy a debt of gratitude, right? Because it's like, hey, thank you, because this is what I did from that, which was a great journey, right? So, and I think that's Well, to this day, one of the things that I find really, really interesting, as I coach folks, it's like, well, do you have weekly or biweekly kind of meetings all together
Mm-hmm.
where you can discuss ideas? And it's like, no, we don't have time for that. And it's like, well, do you sit down individually with all the people that you're responsible for, at kind of that level or whatever level it is, right? So as a GM, with the assistants, as a regional with the GMs, whatever it is. And it's like, no, I don't have time for that. It's like, well, maybe if you made time for those things,
Mm-hmm.
right, you'd have time for everything else, right? It's like, you want me to do all this stuff and you want me to sit down and talk to you. I'm too busy to talk to you. I'm doing all this stuff.
Right.
And it's like, sometimes it's just, I love hearing that because it's like, well, I know the work that we need to do.
Right, exactly.
Right. And for me, one of the things that I do that, is like, so every morning I get up, go for a walk, right? And it's just my time to kind of reflect and prepare for the day and all that stuff. If I do that, I find that I have time for everything else and everybody else, right? If I don't do that, I don't have that time. I think one-on-ones and that point of connection is kind of the same thing. If you do that, you can get everything done, right? If you don't do that, you will always struggle.
Yep.
Right?
Totally.
Isn't that, I mean...
It is, and that goes back to that scarcity and abundance we were talked about earlier, right? When you know that the importance, of taking the time rather than the scarcity of this is my time, I don't have the time.
Yeah.
Then everything really can get done, and you have this pace about you that kind of emulates that, where it's like there's a sense of urgency, but there's also a stroll, right? It's not like you're sprinting from one fire to the next. It's like, oh, there's a fire over there. Hey, look at that. There's smoke. All right, let's meander over that way and grab a fire extinguisher on your way, right? Maybe a thick blanket. We'll put this out together, But there is this like, it's not an immediacy, and I think that lends to that idea, where everything can get done.
Well, all right. Let's be clear. Honestly, right, if there's a fire, I think there's going to be a little hustle, right?
I don't know. I've not seen some fires in Red Chili's before. There's like,
okay, all right. But, it kind of goes to, Covey's quadrants, right? So it talks about, hey, what are the things that are urgent and important? I'm messing with your mic, sorry. So what's urgent and important, right? So probably a little hustle there to get things done. You probably just, because of my lack of speed, you just think that I'm not hustling.
Fair, that's fair.
But when he talks about, hey, what are those things that are important but not urgent, right? So that's the quadrant that I try and live in, right? Right. So that quadrant's all about building relationships and understanding people and caring for people and all those things. The more time you spend there, right, the less things, that important section is all about fire prevention, right? Us as restaurant folks, right? We love the fire, right?
Yeah, we do.
Friday nights, working at Jillian's, it was just like, this is amazing, right? But because we spent so much time talking about how to control that fire in a good, positive way, right? And how, what that night's going to look like and whose role is whose and all that stuff. So that it was a controlled burn, right?
Exactly, right?
That,
And those are great for the environment. We love
right?
controlled
Yeah.
burns.
Right? I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So so that's, for me, kind of trying to live in quadrant two, that important quadrant. It's like, that's where, for me, that's where the work gets done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing is that, for me, a lot of other folks, you get to that point where it's like, that relationship changes and grows,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the the I love you, and it's kind of watching a kid grow up,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we don't share any DNA, but the work that you've done and the man that you've become, it's like, it just makes me really proud to have a little
Mm-hmm.
impact there, right? And you think about that, in that parental, thing. It's like, great parents get to that point, right? So I don't have kids myself,
Right.
but you watch people, and their kids get to be adults, and the relationship changes,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, you'll always be, your mom's boy or whatever, but
Yeah.
in good, healthy relationships, it changes so that they see you as peers. So my wife Julie and her mom
Mm-hmm.
are best friends, right? And I know many people like that their parents are their best friends now, and
Yeah.
they work at a peer relationship. That's us now,
Right.
right?
Most
So
definitely.
and I, there are many, many times where you and I hang out where I come away and I'm like, Jesus, I've learned so much today. I hope that I gave a little,
Yeah.
right? So, but even if that doesn't happen, you just come, away with just this great feeling. It's like, is that like getting to hang out with a true friend and peer?
Totally, totally. And it's interesting when I don't remember when it happened, but I remember the conversation where you told me that I was your mentor now, and I'm like, wait a minute, what kind of fucking parallel universe are we living in? How did this crazy stoner become
Right.
this badass's mentor? Like, I don't understand that, but it does, because you open yourself up to the mutual learning experience.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, I'm the teacher, learn from me. You put your ego aside, and then you just realize, like, holy shit, I just learned something I never even thought I needed to know from this other human being that I've been teaching, that just taught me the most about life.
Yeah.
you know well, with that too, like, I guess, because you've just recently, like, I guess, officially retired. You're still consulting, right?
Yeah.
You're still doing that, but day-to-day operations, like being on the floor, like, you're past that now. But with your work with Hops and Drops, was the last official, like, corporate restaurant
Yeah.
job thing,
Yeah.
right? So, I'm not throwing shade at the millennials, right? I'm not doing that, but there is definitely a mental shift in. Well, I think that there's a shift in every generation's work ethic and work desire,
Yeah.
right? And so, I'm gonna work with the millennials right now, because that's the last group that I worked with. Also, like, the last official restaurant job I had, was the first time I worked with under 18s. All the other restaurants I worked at were, like, served alcohol, and that was the basis. So it was like all 18 and older. But this restaurant, I had 16 and 17-year-old hosts and bussers and stuff like that. And there is an overarching, like, the millennials don't have work ethic. They don't want to work. They don't desire to work. They don't have a desire to learn about work. They don't, all this shit, right? Which I don't think is right. I don't think that's true. But I do think there is a disconnect in general with communication, and I think that might lend to the perceived lack of desire to work for millennials. One of the things I've noticed is conversational, right? A lot of times when I worked at this restaurant, I was working with these 16 and 17-year-old kids that it took them a while to get to know me, but I'm the boss, right? Bosses are scary. And so it took a while to create that relationship. And then we create these relationships, that fun, telling jokes, all,
Yeah.
fun stuff. But as soon as a guest would walk in, they would scatter like roaches when a light was turned on, right? They're just all over the place. And I'm like, what is this? Like, I'm not the greeter. Like, come back over here. Talk to this guest. Hi, my name's Adam. How are you? Welcome in. Do you have 2 people or 3 people, right? Let's give you a seat. But all that was gone because, and what I started to learn through conversations with these folks is that there's so much digital communication that's happening now that we're losing that initial, like, conversational kind of thing, like topic conversations, because let's say I get a text, I have all the time in the world to respond to that text. I can take 10 minutes, I can take 2 days, craft the most beautiful response, witty, maybe with some gifs in there, like all this kind of shit. And then I get to hit send, and then they get some time to think about it and then respond back, right? But this real-time conversation is lost on a lot of kids now. And so what I was working with these kids was, and I keep calling them kids, they were just under 18s. I was working with these younger adults about how to have a real-time conversation and how to feel confident about having answers. So I think there's a bit of that with the millennial effect, I guess maybe we call it, that, there's a perception that they don't care about their work, or they don't want to work, or they don't want to do this. But I think it's just maybe we're approaching it in a different way. And we're approaching it in an incorrect way that they're not able to receive. So in your experience with, these last couple of years that you worked in restaurants and worked with some of the millennials, did you see that? Did you find a way to be able to connect with a group of people that seemingly are unconnectable in a lot of people's minds?
Yeah. So 2 things. The first first story, when I was growing up, my dad had a great set of friends.
Yeah.
And the thing that I used to hear is, from them is, oh, kids your age, right? Or kids these days. And I'm like,
totally.
I'm like, man, I have a job. I'm 14. I got my job. I'm making $2.50 an hour. It's just like, I'm responsible.
Hell yeah.
Not, right? And I was talking to my pops one day, and he's like, yeah, my dad's friends used to say the same thing about me and Paul, his brother. So I think that happens kind of every age, right? So older people look at that next generation. It's like kids these days. Right. One of the really embarrassing things for me is I grew up loving music. My dad loved music. And I'm like, man, I can't understand how you ever lose track of what's going on, right now. And I get to the place where it's like, man, I can't tell you what's on the top 40 or whatever,
right.
It's big and stuff like that. And it's on me, right? So I didn't keep up, right? So but I look at things, and as people are growing up, the world changes, style of communication changes. Right. Here's a really dumbass segue. So I have a group of friends, and we celebrate Festivus all the time.
For the rest of us.
Right? So that's the little Seinfeld thing, right? So I'm like, okay, well, we got to start working on the list of grievances, right? And I'm like, okay, well, I'm thinking about that, and I'm like, I don't have any creativity, so I'm just going to go to the interweb and type in, list of grievances, and I'm sure that something will show up.
Yeah.
Any idea what was the first thing that showed up?
Oh, millennials?
No, it was the 27 grievances that our founding fathers wrote as part of the Declaration of Independence, right?
Okay, yeah.
And it's like, well, that's really interesting. And I started reading it, and it's like, I can't read the shit. Because of that language, right?
Yeah.
So, nowadays, right? So you get a text and it's like 3 letters and an emoji, right?
Right.
Uh, back then, right? It is where art thou upon this day,
Uh-huh.
given the shades of the moon? We have decided in unison and not apart, and you're like, oh my God, thank God for text,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So things change. Things have been changing, all along. And one of I'm just a man full of cliches, but one of them anymore is, hey, want a better team, be a better coach, right?
There you
It's
go.
like, hey, that, here are the people that you are fortunate to get to work with.
Right.
Figure out how to meet them where they are at and have that conversation, right?
Yeah.
The and a lot of times, you know, the it's our job. If you're in the business, it's our job to help introduce people to their first jobs and
Right.
that kind of accountability in a genuine way,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like, and you can be frustrated, right? the and I the one of the other folks that has become a mentor for me used to be, we used to work together. He used to be my direct report. But one of the things that he's really taught me is, that it's like, yes, okay, I get it that you can see where the gaps are and stuff like that. But can you just take a frickin' beat and understand where things are and then approach things in a way that will really connect with people,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really it. It's like, hey, spend time thinking about how you can connect with those people. Stop pissing and moaning about, millennials or Gen Y or Gen Z or whatever generation it
Right.
is, because I guarantee you, they're going to grow up, they're going to have kids, and their friends are going to talk about how messed up that generation is, right?
100%.
So, but there are good kids coming up every day,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I echo that. I think we got to meet people with where they're at. We can't keep shoving people in boxes that we've prepared for them. That doesn't make any sense.
well, it's never made sense, right? So the only really thing that's changed is we have this great phrase now. I don't know what we called it before, right?
Yeah.
But and I think that maybe that has been part of the learning too. Though, is like, hey, I don't care what you want. Figure out what they want. Figure
Right.
out how you can provide that for them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Help them with their adventure. I've always found that, when that happens, they'll help you with yours, whatever it is.
Right.
So
Yep.
it's a journey together.
Yep. I remember when we first started working together and you promoted me into management and we basically loosely had this mentor-mentee relationship. I was still confused at the time. I was like 22, 20, or 23, 24. And I remember the conversation. I was like, well, okay, yeah, totally. I'll start managing. We'll learn that together. Should I go to school for this? Should I go to business school? And you basically told me, like, no, don't worry about that. Like, we can continue talking about that, but learn from me. Like, I went to the school, I did the stuff, I had the degrees. Like, just learn from me. And in a beautiful way, like, you saved me thousands and thousands of dollars in schooling and training that I could have had to go do, following in your footsteps, getting a hospitality degree. But in that industry, you can be promoted into those positions with the knowledge base that you gain, right? So that was one of those beautiful lessons that you taught me early on, is that, no, I don't need to go spend a bunch of money on schooling. I can get the information, or I can learn it on the job, real time, learning shit that you could probably never teach me in school. How to dodge a fight, like a billy club getting thrown at you, and all of a sudden it's like one of your bartenders jumps out of the kitchen with a spatula and a butcher knife, and you're like, okay, cool, we're doing this, huh? All right,
Right.
You can't teach that shit.
Or the whole, hey, when there's an active shooter, don't everybody run to the window to see what's going on. Run away, right? It's like, God dang.
That was when I was faced with the ignorance of my own doing. I'm like, wow, you're all at the window and there's a guy going for a gun in his car right now. Like, run upstairs away from the windows. Like, Jesus Christ.
But yeah, and that's not, I know that I would have supported you if you wanted to go to school. I think education and formal education is a great thing.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
Yeah, right.
But if you have the time and money, it's like, man, it's a great investment, right? Yeah. But there are, it's like, again, right? It's like, hey, there are some people that are just going to love college. I love college. I loved it so much I went for 6 years.
There you go. Keep this train going, man.
Right? And then there are some people that just have no appetite for that setting, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that they can't learn, and that there are. Man, I've seen people, especially in our industry, that have come up that have little formal education that are amazing leaders and amazing business people, right? So it just really depends, right? And then there's kind of that middle path where you can get certificates or go to a community college or whatever. It all works. Mm-hmm. It all works.
Yep. And for myself, what I've learned about myself and my learning is that I do better if I'm directed individually, right? If I'm in a group setting, I can hide easily, right? But if I'm being taught something directly from another human being or another thing, then I'm doing that thing, right? And so that was where the mentor-mentee relationship really helped me, because I never had that growing up. Like, I had coaches, my parents were there, but nobody really took me aside and said, hey, like, let's make sure that you know what you're doing, right? And that you were one of those first people. And that was, that idea that I can learn on my own. I don't have to go to a school. I can find a teacher. I can read a book, right? Yeah. And I didn't. All that was foreign to me, right? And it was a beautiful concept to know that, like, I was the one in charge of my learning at that point. Like, I could find a book, and before podcasts, I could find a blog, I could find some kind of information, and then I was introduced to the idea of a teacher. It's like the goal of the teacher, the beauty of a teacher is that they can understand when you need more information, they can press on the gas, or they can understand when you've had too much, you need to sit with that information a little bit and then pull some stuff back. But when if I don't have that teacher, then I'm just going to keep plowing through books. That's what I've learned about myself, and not really retain that information, because nobody's saying, hey, whoa. Let's not just go from book to book. Like, take a week, like, ruminate about that. Maybe write something about that, what you've just read. See what the information is that's at, and then we'll progress forward. So having somebody like yourself and having those mentors and those teachers in our life give us that directionality and that structure that we might not even realize we're lacking.
Yeah. And so that practice, right, is so important. Yeah. Right. And so I'm like you, right? So I'm good at, you get into a group setting, it's like, no, you go. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. Right. And then you get home and you're like, well, I didn't do it. I really don't have an idea of what's going on here. Right. And then you're like, oh, okay, now I got to go after class, right? And go try and learn and stuff like that. But that, however you do it, right? So understanding that, process is important, and you can read and talk, you and I can talk about those things, right? You go back to one-on-ones. One-on-one's a great example, right? You can talk about, hey, how great a one-on-one is and the power of it and yada, yada, yada. Until you actually practice doing one-on-ones, right? So that the first one-on-one that somebody does is just terrible.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Horrible.
Right? Oh, yeah. And it's like, so in those kind of things, it's like, if you have a great coach, right? It's like, hey, this person's going to show me what a one-on-one is, what the expectation is, how to build an arc, every week, and, so that things don't get lost from week to week and you don't start from scratch, all that stuff, right? But, the power of the real learning is when those roles reverse, right? So, and it's like, you know, so like when you and I started, it's like, okay, here's your one-on-one. Here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about your people. You're part of the P&L, all that stuff. But the work, the magic really happened, and your growth really happened when you sat down and it's like, okay, here's my one-on-one. Here's what we're going to talk about.
Totally.
Here, here's my thoughts. Here's what I want to do. And I, it's so powerful when you're sitting on the other side of that and you realize it's like, okay, we've just gone a whole hour and all I've done is grunted a couple of times and had some coffee because this person's spot on. They know exactly what to do, and you maybe have asked a couple of questions.
Right.
So
It is nice when it's a beautiful, like, welcome surprise when that shift happens, and then like you get to sit back and just see the progress that this human's made, and like there's like there is a little sense of pride of like, man, good for you,
Absolutely.
man. Like, this is awesome. Like, good.
Right.
I'm so happy to see you connect these dots.
yeah,
I think that it is so in a long-winded way. We've been talking about mentorship, mentors, but one of the I think the initial thing I wanted to sit down and talk to you about when we started the idea months ago was leadership.
Yeah.
And I think so finding somebody that can mentor you, or finding somebody that you can mentor, or something like in that realm, readies you to become a leader. And we need leaders in this world, right? We need balanced leaders in this world. And one of the things that we've talked a lot about on this podcast and kind of moved around a little bit today is the type of leaders that we're shown on a mass scale. Right now, there's individual leaders that we've all worked with, or maybe we've been by proxy to, that have made some kind of impact on our lives. But a lot of the leadership that we see on a mass scale, let's say like on TV or represented in movies or things like that, are and even real life, not just TV, but like real life and TV, are what we would consider maybe shadow leaders. People that are going a little too far to the extremes with the way that they lead. Right? They're iron fisted with their leading. They're demanding with their leading. They're not. They're in an echo chamber. Right? They're only surrounding themselves with yes people. Right? So, and that's, I think, caused a lot of people to think that that's the way leadership is. And it's a very masculine way to lead, right? And I'm not saying male centric, I'm saying masculine, right? Where it's the my way or the highway. Those are all like kind of ideas of the shadow masculine. And a lot of the people that the folks that recognize as feminine or female are talking to me, that our leaders are talking to me about having to step overtly into that masculine realm to kind of meet where that aggression kind of is, right? And so it causes a bit of imbalance because there's this swing of aggression towards like, this is the way we run business. And I think there is the opportunity for us to find a lot more balance with that, and a lot more empathy on a mass scale, not just on an individual scale. So working towards that balanced kind of idea of leaders. So when you encounter like an egoic person, in the past that you've had, like, are there ways where you can help them understand the way that in which they're leading without blatantly saying, hey, you're doing this wrong? Because in a way, like it might work for some businesses, to have that kind of leadership. Sales, for example, it's a very aggressive type of business, and so maybe more aggressive type leadership might work like that. But I've never responded well to my way or the highway leaders or things like that. So, how do we kind of work with that if we have a leader like that, or if maybe we find ourselves in a leadership role where it's like, shit, man, I'm an asshole. I didn't realize I was an asshole till now. Like, how do we start to maneuver around those kind of ideas?
Wow. Well, let's see. So let's start with kind of sales. What's the best kind of salesperson?
Oh, I don't know. That's I mean, I guess somebody that sells. Right?
Yeah. Well, so for me, the best kind of salesperson is that person that spends the time understanding what your need and want is.
Okay.
Right. and then helping you buy that, whatever that is, right? So the and I'm trying to remember the gentleman's name, but back in business school, you learn that, hey, so nobody comes to a hardware store to buy a 1/4 inch drill bit. They come to buy a 1/4 inch hole, right? So, right? So,
Okay. All right.
so it's like, hey, I just need that tool that's going to provide me with a 1/4 inch hole,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So I, when you think about sales and I, we got to experience that with Chris and Sid,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like, hey, so they were great salespeople, not because they sold what they wanted to sell, but what that guest wanted to experience at Jillian's,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
So to me, those are the best type of salespeople,
Okay.
right? The, I kind of shy away from talking about people on the national stage or whatever because for as much um, perceived transparency on what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
you still just see kind of snippets and stuff like that, and
Right.
the power of the media can shape those conversations and those impressions any way they want to. Movies can do that,
Right.
the same thing. You have to understand that stuff is fiction. It's there to tell a good story,
Right.
right?
Right.
They probably do a great job telling a good story, right? And the thing that that just really bugs me is that especially on the political front, right? The way that they convey that story most of the time is through fear, right? It's
Right.
like, hey, here's all the terrible things that my opponent is guilty of,
Mm-hmm.
right? Instead of, hey, here are all the things that, uh, you know, uh, we could try and accomplish together. If I was in office, right?
Right.
And
Right.
and because for whatever reason, fear works,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So the I can't really talk about kind of that, shadow leader, national stage, all that stuff. I can talk about, folks that are convinced that their way is the right
Mm.
way and the only way,
Right. Right.
right? And I think, I, you know, one of the things that happens is you have leaders like that, and it's like, and you try and introduce alternative ideas, and it shuts you down. They
Right.
shut you down, right? And I I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage to kind of face those leaders and just offer an alternative way,
Right.
right? And the it can be very frustrating, right? So and I so the one of the great fortunes of my life is that I've worked in environments where you know there's been these wonderful mentors, and I've been working on these great companies, and for whatever reason leadership's changed, and it's gone from this great collaborative, compassionate um, environment to, hey, my way or the highway,
Right.
right?
Right.
There have been times where it's like, that's not going to work and I got to go.
Right.
There have been times where I've just become disenchanted and got my ass fired, right? There's times where I've tried to work inside the system, got my ass fired,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So I understand kind of the risk and the challenge and all of that stuff,
Yeah.
but I kind of got to that point where it's like, hey, I don't care because I'm writing my story, and my story is about how I work, and what I do, and how I can be of service, right? So if you approach it that way, right? One of the things that I talk about is like, hey, instead of you being a victim or a villain or whatever in somebody else's story, right? Just work on being the hero in your own story, right? So do the things at the end of the day so when you're sitting in that pine box 6 feet under, right? People talk about the things that you tried to do that might have been heroic or, that were good and kind and compassionate and, all those things. So write your own story, right?
Yep.
So, and for me right now, right, as I try and write my own story, when I run into those folks that struggle with being collaborative and listening first and all that stuff, it's like, okay, well, that's a challenge, right? So I think of myself as a coach. Here's a beautiful opportunity to take a long-term approach to help coach somebody through this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I approach it,
Okay.
right? So
Yeah.
it's like,
That's so when you're talking about that, what kind of brings to mind for me, because both politics and business, right? They can be looked at as maybe more business than politics, but like, so with business, for example, like we generally run things on a year basis for some,
Yeah.
for whether it's calendar year, fiscal year, whatever.
that's the way we've always done it.
Right, exactly, right? We always do it that way. And, a lot of that's based off taxes, right? We pay taxes yearly, so we got to, figure out what's going on with that. And so that almost puts like a finality into this thing that really isn't finite at all,
Yeah.
right? And that goes to the idea of like the Simon Sinek book that he wrote recently, The Infinite Game, what James Carse wrote back in the day, back in the 80s, Finite and Infinite Games, where, a finite game has it's like sports, right? A finite game has a beginning, has an end, right? There's a winner at the end. It's very definitive, but an infinite game will be played forever, right?
Yep.
We're always playing this game. And so in politics, there's no end in politics, right?
Yeah.
We're always still playing that game. There's same with business. There's no real definitive end in business. And so, but we keep putting these metrics in there as a finality to it, right? This idea of this finiteness, because when that person leaves the office, maybe their game's done being played, but the game of politics is still being played. Right?
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting, and you bring up sports as being finite. Hey, that game's finite.
The game is finite, there
right?
you go. Yeah.
So, in our world, that shift is finite, right? So,
right.
on Friday night, we think about the 3 hours of pain, right? It's just like this is just controlled chaos, right? It's a controlled burn, right? So it's but the shift eventually ends. Even the frickin' Super Bowl shift that we were came to an end. Okay, it lasted for like 2 weeks.
I still have nightmares about that shit, man. Seahawks crying everywhere, God damn, it was crazy.
So there's finiteness to it, right?
Yeah.
But you look at those winning organizations, for a Seahawks boy, talking about the Patriots, right, is terrible, right?
Yeah.
But there's a team that's found how to win over and over and over again, right? So, the Yankees, you pick out your favorite teams that are perennial winners, right? Yep. They're playing that infinite game, right? And they know that, hey, they're probably not going to win every Super Bowl or every World Series, but they play as if they're going to.
Right.
Right. So, and I think, in business, you can approach things that way too, right? So it's like, hey, you're not going to be the best at everything, or you're not even going to be the best at one thing forever, right? But you can play as though you want to or are going to, right? And it's having those things where what are your set of best practices, and hopefully they're people centric, right? That allow you to do that. And I honestly don't know that you can have a legendary team that's not people centric, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, and then for me, those finite marks, right? So the shift, the day, the week, the month, 90 days, the year, right? Those are just times where you can benchmark your progress, right? It's like, but you're right. It's like, hey, I'm not going to stop, right?
Right.
So, it is the infinite game. The best thing that you can do is surround yourself and compete with folks that are worthy rivals, right? As Cynic says, right? It's like, hey, you can approach things that way where it's like, we were talking about earlier about all the different leaders in the industry that I'm fortunate to know that, are open, that do share best practices, that, root for you as you root for them, as you compete, right?
Right.
So it's like, so having those worthy rivals just makes the game that much more interesting, right?
It really does. Yeah. I mean, and that's a great spin on it too. There can be this definitiveness on the finite, but I mean, even though life still has an ending for the individual, life doesn't have an ending in general.
Yeah.
Right? Where the life is an infinite game.
Right.
And I think that, when we can remove ourselves from this, like, this rule that whether we've created it ourselves or not, like you were talking about stories earlier, a lot of times, like, we're stuck in these stories that we've created, and then within those stories there's this finality, there's this finiteness of, like, win-lose metrics, whatever that is, that's set up for you, and if you don't meet that, then in your head you've lost. But if we just look at redefining the rules and looking at it as an infinite game,
Yeah.
like the way somebody brought this up that really landed home for me was they brought it in religion, right? And they said, okay, so let's say the organized religion as we know it, it's maybe like 4,000 or 5,000 years old, right? Maybe 2,000 if you caught like Christianity, but the what do they call the Zorats or the Zorites? That's been about 5,000 years old, right? So if you look at the snapshot of religion right now, we have no idea how long life is going to be, civilized life like we know it. So if you look at a snapshot of religion, you can say religion sucks. It's bullshit. It's caused wars. It's caused death. It's caused all this stuff, right? It's caused people to turn against people. Religion sucks. But what if religion's going to be 100,000, 200,000, a million, 100 million years old, and we're only looking at a 2,000-year snapshot? Religion has the potential to grow into something maybe better, maybe something worse. We have no idea yet.
Yeah.
But we're putting all the information on this definitive little time right now. So if we can broaden our scope into understanding, like, hey, okay, so life right now is this, but all of life is all of this, right? I'm just looking at this chunk, this finite side of it, your business, your life, your relationships, whatever it is, and you can zoom out a little bit more and see that this is like part of the story of the grand scheme.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, cool. All right, well, maybe it's not finite. Maybe the important part, the chapters that I play within this role are that important to push the story forward. And it might be finite for me, but for the story, it's the never-ending story,
Yeah, so absolutely. And isn't one of the goals, shouldn't one of the goals be, hey, just leave the place better than you found it, right? So it's like,
damn straight. I think, you were, and I said this earlier, but you were the first person that taught me to respect the place that I worked at. And that phrase right there, I think it lent to the idea of what you used to call GMIs, and where you'd walk around basically looking at the floor all the time. And if there was something on the floor, you'd pick it up. right? You notice your surroundings. You make the place better than you left it. Yes, maybe 30 people just walked up the stairs and dropped 30 napkins. Does that need to be there for the next 30 people to walk up? No. Go down there and pick those fucking napkins up, right? It's all good. Yes, the other 30 people might drop 30 more napkins. And then you know what? You have job security, my friend.
Right?
Oh man, well, dude, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Do you have more that you want to talk about for leaders, mentors, anything else you want to tap dance towards?
Uh, I think that you have done an amazing job kind of leading this conversation. And honestly, you'll probably be surprised, but I come in and I'm like, okay, this is, uh, I approach it with a little trepidation, right? But man, thank you for just the conversation, and have enjoyed the last few minutes or hour or whatever we've been spending. But I'm good if you are. Any kind of closing questions or thoughts?
I think it's more of a statement. Like for myself, like I never thought of desiring a mentor. Right. I never thought of finding another, like a parental type figure, to help me with my adult life.
Yeah.
I never thought that was a thing. I maybe heard the words before, but never, felt it was something on my path. But I can tell you, like, that was us working together changed my life. Right. And I think, if we really get down the nitty gritty, everything changes our life. Right.
Absolutely.
But the impact that you've had in my life and the trickle down effect that I can see, it's when I as I've gotten through restaurants and into more of my spiritual work now, there's a lot of stuff where we talk about with the lineages of teachers, right? And so, my Reiki teacher is a lineage connected to this person, connect to that person, connect that person, blah, 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 down the line. And it's just interesting to have that verbiage now to look back at my young adult life and see the lineage of teachers that have taught me, through business, through personal life, through professional life, and having you as one of the very first people that ever took an interest in me and guided me. And then, still being in contact with people that have worked with you and still know you and still like feel that same love. Like it's so impactful, man. And so I appreciate you taking that time, whether you intended to or not, but making that impact, because I'm only one person that you've impacted, that you're talking to right now, but you've worked with thousands and thousands of staff members, whether management or hourly staff. And so the potential for that impact to be just broadcast around the greater Seattle area, and then where it shifts to from there, and then now you're in hops and drops is in 3 or 4 different states. So I think I'm grateful for you, and I think as far as the listeners out there, fill in your gaps, right? Find somebody to help you fill in your gaps. Like, there's a lot of good people out there that have your best interest in mind, that want to really help work with you. For myself, I was gifted that at a young age, and I want to gift that to somebody else, right? We want to keep that lineage going. We want to keep that idea moving. So thank you for all the work you've done, all the work you continue to do. Thanks for being my friend. I really value our relationship.
Yeah. So thank you, and thank you so much for being part of my journey, because like you said, I might have changed your life. You certainly have changed mine. And I know that I am a better person for knowing you. So.
Man. Love you, brother.
Love you too.
All right. We'll see you next time, guys.
All right.
Thank you so much for spending time with Jeff and I. Please check out the show notes for any ways to get in touch with Jeff or myself. And please like or subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. Obeisance and love. We'll see y'all next time.